In the quiet, sun-drenched village of Tindoro, where the wind carried the scent of firewood and the distant beat of drums echoed through the hills, lived a girl named Nyarai. She was known by everyone as the kindest soul in the village, always smiling, always helping, even when no one noticed. Her mother, Tinashe, was a gentle woman who sang lullabies while grinding maize and kissed Nyarai's forehead every night before sleep. Their home, though small, overflowed with love. But everything changed the year Nyarai turned 7. A strange fever swept through the village, and within days, her beloved mother was gone. One moment, Nyarai was holding her mother's hand, and the next, she was staring at a freshly dug grave. The drums that once sang of joy now mourned loss, and her home turned cold, like a house stripped of its soul. Her father, Barungo, once a tall, proud man who carved wood and told stories by firelight, was never the same. Grief clouded his heart. Within just a few moons, he returned from the market with a new woman, Zalima. She came with sharp eyes, painted lips, and a daughter named Tanura, who clung to her like a shadow. The villagers whispered, "Too soon," they said, but Barungo silenced them with silence. At first, Nyarai hoped Zalima would be kind. She offered to help her unpack, shared her mother's favorite stool, and even braided Tanura's hair. But soon, the mask dropped. Zalima began to give her orders in a harsh voice. "Clean the floor, Nyarai. Wash the dishes, Nyarai. Don't speak unless spoken to." Slowly, Nyarai's smile faded. Barungo seemed blind. Maybe it was guilt, maybe it was fear. But he no longer noticed how Zalima locked the food cupboard, how she made Nyarai sleep on a worn mat near the firewood, or how she gave her daughter fresh fruit while Nyarai ate yesterday's scraps. The once loving father became a silent shadow, and Nyarai learned that tears must be hidden, because no one would wipe them for her. The villagers noticed her thin arms, her tired eyes, her silence. But Zalima always smiled in public, pretending to be the perfect wife and mother. "Nyarai is just shy," she'd say, while squeezing the girl's shoulder just hard enough to hurt. But inside Nyarai, a quiet flame began to burn. She didn't understand why life had changed so quickly, why love had vanished so cruelly. But she held on to one thing, her mother's last words, whispered in her ear the night before she died. "You are stronger than you know, my little one." And though the days were long and the nights colder, Nyarai kept those words close to her heart, because somewhere deep inside, she believed this wasn't the end of her story. It was only the beginning. From the moment the sun rose until it sank behind the hills, Nyarai's hands never rested. She swept the compound, fetched water from the far-off stream, scrubbed clothes until her fingers bled, and cooked meals she was barely allowed to taste. Zalima turned her into a servant, barking orders as if Nyarai was nothing more than a slave. "Faster, you lazy girl, do it again, it's not clean." Tanura, her stepsister, copied her mother's cruelty, laughing when Nyarai tripped or spilled something, then reporting it to Zalima, who would punish her even more. Nyarai's days became endless cycles of chores and humiliation. She was not allowed to play, not allowed to rest, not even allowed to eat at the same time as them. She would watch as Tanura wore new dresses, braided her hair with beads, and boasted about how, "Mother says I'm the real daughter of this house." Meanwhile, Nyarai wore torn clothes that barely covered her knees and walked barefoot across thorns without a single word of pity. Every evening, Nyarai looked for her father, Barungo, hoping he would see her swollen hands, her tired eyes, or the bruises she tried to hide. But he always looked away. He sat quietly under the mango tree, sipping his local brew, pretending not to hear Zalima shouting or see the pain written all over his daughter's face. When Nyarai gathered the courage to speak, to tell him what was happening, he raised his hand, not in anger, but to silence her. "Respect your elders," he said flatly, not even meeting her eyes. That hurt more than anything Zalima ever did. Barungo had changed. The father who once lifted her onto his shoulders, who danced with her around the fire, who called her his little lioness, was now gone. In his place stood a silent man who let his daughter suffer right before his eyes. At night, Nyarai cried into the thin cloth that served as her blanket. The cold floor became her bed. Her stomach growled, her back ached, and her heart carried a weight too heavy for a young girl to bear. Still, she refused to break. Somewhere deep within, there was a quiet voice, her mother's voice, reminding her that even when people treat you like nothing, your worth does not disappear. The village people sometimes saw her carrying heavy firewood or buckets bigger than her small frame. "That child works too much," they'd whisper. But no one stepped in. Zalima always had an excuse, and Barungo's silence kept everyone at bay. So Nyarai endured, day after day, pain after pain. She walked in chains made not of iron, but of silence, neglect, and cruelty. Yet in her eyes, there still remained a flicker of something powerful, hope, the kind of hope that waits, watches, and one day rises. Even though Nyarai's life was full of pain and suffering, there was still a small corner in her heart where hope lived. She would hide under the old mango tree when her chores were done, trying to escape the noise and shouting of Zalima's voice. One day, while sweeping the back of the hut, she found an old wooden box covered in dust. Inside were a few torn books, forgotten stories, faded pages, and words she had never seen before. She didn't know all the letters, but something about those books called to her. Slowly, with the help of a kind village schoolboy who sometimes passed by, she began learning to read. Bit by bit, she taught herself, holding on to every sentence like a treasure. It was during one of those quiet afternoons, sitting alone with a book on her lap, that she met him, Chisomo. He was a traveler, tall with kind eyes and a soft voice, who had come to Tindoro to sell handmade shoes. He found her reading by the tree and smiled gently. "You like stories?" he asked. Nyarai nodded shyly, not used to strangers being kind to her. Chisomo sat with her, and for the first time in years, someone listened to her speak, not as a servant, not as a burden, but as a girl with dreams. He visited often, always bringing scraps of cloth, buttons, or thread. One day, he gave her a broken needle and a piece of cloth. "Let your hands learn," he said. And that night, after Zalima and Tanura had gone to sleep, Nyarai lit a small oil lamp with the last of her saved wax and began to sew. Her hands were clumsy at first, but she didn't give up. Stitch by stitch, she taught herself. At first, she practiced on old rags. Then, she started repairing her torn clothes. Each night, she became better. Her fingers moved with care, and slowly, the needle became her friend. It became her secret world. While others slept, she was building something no one could see. A skill, a dream, a way out. The books gave her courage, the needle gave her purpose, and Chisomo's quiet support gave her hope. He told her stories of people who started with nothing and became something great. "Even the tallest tree," he said once, "starts as a seed buried in darkness." Nyarai held on to those words. During the day, she still suffered. She still cleaned, scrubbed, and endured insults. But at night, under the flicker of her tiny lamp, she created small pieces of beauty, thread by thread, stitch by stitch. It was her escape, her secret strength. No one knew that while Zalima was busy mocking her, Nyarai was slowly preparing for the day she would no longer live in the shadow. That day was coming, and when it arrived, the world would finally see what she had been becoming all along. The day the sky turned grey, it felt like the world had already decided to be cruel. Nyarai was in the middle of scrubbing the compound floor when she heard Zalima's sharp scream. "Who took my gold bangle?" The voice thundered through the compound like a storm. Nyarai dropped her brush, heart racing. She had seen the bangle earlier on the table, but had not touched it. Still, when Zalima stormed out of the house, pointing her long finger at her, Nyarai knew what was coming. "You!" Zalima shouted, eyes full of hatred. "You think you can steal from me and get away with it?" Nyarai shook her head, tears already burning her eyes. "I didn't take anything, Mama Zalima, I swear." Before she could finish, Tanura stepped out, holding something in her hand. It was the missing bangle. "I found it hidden under Nyarai's mat," she said, smirking with fake innocence. Nyarai's heart dropped. She had never hidden anything under her mat, only her sewing kit and one of the old books she read at night. Zalima didn't even give her a chance to explain. She turned to Barungo, who stood silently as always, staring at the ground. "This girl is a thief," she shouted. "She brings shame to this house. She cannot stay another night here." Barungo didn't say a word. He didn't fight for his daughter. He didn't ask questions. He just nodded slowly, like a man who no longer had a voice. And that silence cut deeper than any slap ever could. Zalima grabbed Nyarai by the arm and dragged her outside the gate. The neighbors peeked through their windows, whispering. Some looked shocked. Some looked away. No one stepped forward. "Take your rubbish and leave," Zalima screamed, throwing out Nyarai's old bag. Inside it, Nyarai found only a torn wrapper, a broken slipper, and her tiny sewing kit, wrapped in cloth like a baby. She looked around, hoping someone would speak up, hoping her father would finally say something, but all she heard was the slamming of the gate behind her. That evening, Nyarai walked away from the only home she had ever known. The sky was heavy, the road was dusty, and her stomach was empty, but she held her sewing kit tightly in her hand, like it was the only thing keeping her alive. With every step, she wiped her tears and reminded herself of the skills she had learned in the dark. Zelima had taken everything from her, but not her hands, not her heart, and not her dream. She walked into the unknown, her feet tired, her soul broken, but her spirit burning, because deep inside, Nyarai knew this wasn't the end of her story. This was just the beginning of something greater, and one day, the same people who threw her out would hear her name and tremble. The journey to Zobari town was long and painful, but Nyarai kept walking. Her feet were swollen, and her stomach ached with hunger, yet her heart refused to give up. She reached the bustling town with only one thing in her hand, her little sewing kit, wrapped in cloth like a treasure. She slept under shop awnings and begged for leftover food at the market, until one morning, she stood outside a small tailoring shop called Threads of Grace. She watched through the window as women moved fabric with graceful hands, and something inside her stirred. This was where she belonged. She waited by the entrance, silent, hoping someone would see her. Hours passed. Finally, a tall, bold woman with sharp eyes and colourful head wrap stepped out. "You again?" she asked. It was Madame Jemba, the owner. Nyarai lowered her eyes and whispered, "Please, I can clean. Anything. Just give me a chance." Madame Jemba sighed, but saw something in the girl's face. Maybe it was the hunger, maybe the fire. "Fine, clean the shop. No trouble, no pay," she said. And just like that, Nyarai began her new life. Every morning, she arrived before anyone else and swept the floors, washed the windows, fetched water, and arranged fabric. She worked silently, never complaining, never late. But while others stitched dresses and gowns, Nyarai watched. Her eyes followed every movement. Her hands itched to hold a needle again. Late one night, when everyone had left, Nyarai stayed behind. She picked up scraps from the trash bin and began stitching by the light of a small bulb. She didn't know Madame Jemba was still inside, watching from the shadows. Her fingers moved fast, stitching a small pattern into the cloth, steady and clean. Madame Jemba stepped forward slowly. "Who taught you that?" she asked. Nyarai jumped in fear, dropping the fabric. I taught myself," she stammered. Madame Jemba picked up the cloth and examined the neat stitches. "This is better than some of my apprentices," she said, raising an eyebrow. The next morning, everything changed. Madame Jemba called Nyarai to her office. "You will no longer clean floors," she said. "From today, you will learn under me." Nyarai's heart almost stopped. She couldn't believe it. Tears filled her eyes, but she quickly wiped them away. She didn't want to appear weak. She wanted to make this chance count. Days turned into weeks. Madame Jemba was strict but fair. She taught Nyarai how to measure, how to cut patterns, how to handle expensive fabrics. Nyarai learned quickly, and every gown she finished was more beautiful than the last. Customers began asking, "Who made this?" Her name began to spread softly through Zobari. From a village girl thrown out with nothing, Nyarai was now shaping clothes with golden threads. She still carried her old sewing kit in her pocket, not as a tool, but as a reminder. The girl who once had nothing was now becoming something, and the world was just beginning to notice. Nyarai's life had changed, but her dreams had only just begun. Under Madame Jemba's guidance, she blossomed into a talented designer. Her fingers danced across fabrics like magic, and her ideas were fresh, bold, and beautiful. Soon, she began adding her personal touch to every piece, tiny beadwork, hand-sewn patterns, or a unique twist in the design. Clients started asking for her by name. "Where is the girl with the golden fingers?" they'd say. Madame Jemba, proud and smiling, encouraged her to dream even bigger. One evening, as she sat by her small wooden table in a corner of the shop, she carefully stitched her initials into a dress, ND. It was the first time she dared to give her work a name, Nyara Designs. The name came from her own name, Nyarai, but she chose to spell it like light and luxury. Quietly, she started sewing small labels and attaching them to her work. Word spread fast. A bride from the capital city ordered her wedding dress. A businesswoman from a distant town wore her gown to a gala and told everyone, "It's from a girl called Nyarai in Zobari." More orders poured in, and soon Nyarai had more clients than she could handle. With Madame Jemba's blessing, she decided to open her own shop. It was a small space at first, just one sewing machine, a table, and a dusty window. But it had her name on the door, Nyarai Designs. She poured her heart into every stitch, working late into the night and waking up before sunrise. Her dresses were bold, colourful, and full of life, just like the dreams she once had while scrubbing floors. Her designs travelled from Zobari to the capital, then to other cities like Ujambo and Kasita. People everywhere wanted a Nyarai. One sunny afternoon, a man in a crisp white suit walked into her shop. He didn't say much at first. He just watched her work. Then he introduced himself. "I'm Makalu," he said. "I own several fashion businesses across the country. I've been watching your work, Nyarai. It's time the world sees what you can do." Makalu offered her something she had never imagined, a partnership. He would invest in her brand, help her open new branches, create a bigger team, and even showcase her work on international runways. At first, Nyarai couldn't believe it. She had no family name, no wealth, no title, only her hands and her heart. But Makalu looked at her and said, "Your story is your strength." And so, Nyarai Designs spread like wildfire. Her face appeared in magazines. Her designs were worn by celebrities. Reporters called her the village girl who sewed her way to the top. But through all the success, Nyarai never forgot the tears she cried, the cold nights she spent alone, or the small sewing kit that started it all. This was her turning point, not just in business, but in life. And deep down, she knew it was time to go back and face the people who once thought she'd never become anything. The sun was shining bright over Tindoro that day, but no one expected what was about to happen. The villagers were busy with their daily routines, fetching water, preparing food, and selling goods in the market, when the rumble of engines echoed through the quiet streets. Heads turned, children stopped playing. 3 luxury cars, sleek and shiny, rolled into the village square like something out of a dream. No one had ever seen such cars in Tindoro. Curious eyes peeked from behind doors and windows, whispering and wondering who it could be. Then, the doors opened. Out stepped a graceful woman dressed in a rich flowing gown, made of golden fabric that shimmered in the sunlight. Her heels clicked softly against the dusty ground. Her hair was styled to perfection. Her skin glowed. The villagers gasped. Is that Nyarai?" Someone whispered. Others couldn't believe their eyes. The same girl who once walked barefoot in torn clothes was now standing like a queen in front of them. Nyarai had returned, not in shame or sorrow, but in power and pride. Her return wasn't just to visit. She had come with a purpose. She stood before the crowd and announced her plans. "I'm here to build a fashion academy right here in Tindoro," she said, her voice strong and warm. "An academy for girls like me, girls with dreams but no opportunities." The crowd erupted in cheers. Women clapped. Young girls' eyes lit up with hope. Old men nodded in admiration. The entire village buzzed with excitement. But 2 people stood frozen in silence. Zalima and her daughter, Tanura. They watched from the doorway of their now crumbling house. Zalima's once proud face was filled with shock and disbelief. Tanura, who used to wear fine clothes while Nyarai cleaned the floors, now looked dull and tired. Life hadn't been kind to them since Nyarai left. Zalima's husband, Barungo, had fallen sick years ago, and with no one to help, their fortunes slowly disappeared. The house grew old, and the respect they once had vanished. Now, standing just a few steps away, was the girl they used to treat like a slave, richer, stronger, and more respected than ever. Nyarai turned to them, her eyes calm, not filled with revenge, but with quiet power. Zalima tried to force a smile, as if to pretend nothing had happened. "Nyarai, you've returned." "Yes," Nyarai replied, her voice gentle but firm. "And this time, I return on my own terms." That moment shook the entire village. It wasn't just a return, it was a declaration. The girl who had been thrown out with nothing had come back with everything. And she wasn't there to show off. She was there to lift others, to change lives, to rewrite the story of Tindoro. Nyarai had become a symbol of hope, of strength, and of sweet, silent justice. The queen had returned, and she came not with a crown, but with purpose. Zalima and Tanura walked through the gates of the newly built fashion academy in Tindoro with dusty feet and heavy hearts. Life had been hard on them since Nyarai left. The respect they once enjoyed in the village had disappeared. Their savings were gone, and their house was falling apart. Hunger had become a daily visitor. Pride was no longer a luxury they could afford. So, when they heard about job openings at the new academy, they rushed there, desperate for any work, cleaning, sweeping, anything that could bring food to the table. They had no idea who owned the grand building that stood tall and proud in the heart of the village. They didn't know the hands behind the polished glass doors, the elegant uniform, or the sparkling halls. All they saw was opportunity. Standing at the gate, they were greeted by a calm, well-dressed lady who looked important. It was Nyarai, but not the girl they remembered. Her face was mature, her posture confident, and her clothes screamed success. But they didn't recognize her. Time and transformation had changed everything. "We are looking for any kind of work," Zalima said, lowering her eyes, her voice filled with shame. "We can clean, wash, anything." The woman in charge looked at them silently for a moment. Then she nodded. "You can start tomorrow. Report to the cleaning supervisor. You'll be paid weekly." Relief washed over their tired faces. They bowed and thanked her, not knowing that the very woman they were begging was the same girl they had once forced to scrub their floors. The next morning, dressed in faded wrappers and old sandals, Zalima and Tindoro began their new lives, cleaning toilets, sweeping corridors, mopping the academy floors. They watched students walk by in beautiful uniforms, confident and proud. Some of the students even looked at them with pity. It stung, but they said nothing. They had no choice. Days turned into weeks. Zalima scrubbed bathrooms with hands that once wore gold bangles. Tindoro carried mops and buckets instead of silk handbags. Every corner they cleaned, every floor they wiped, reminded them of the girl they used to torment. Still, they never questioned who owned the academy. They were too tired, too broken. And Nyarai never revealed herself, not yet. She walked past them sometimes, watching quietly, not with hatred, not with revenge, but with a deep understanding that life had already served them the justice she never needed to speak aloud. In silence, the tables had turned. The ones who once made her feel like nothing were now cleaning her floors, and they didn't even know. This wasn't just karma, it was poetry, and Nyarai was letting the universe tell the story, one quiet step at a time. The grand event was the talk of Tindoro. Bright banners waved in the wind, music filled the air, and villagers dressed in their finest clothes gathered at the fashion academy to witness the first graduation ceremony. The academy had quickly become a pride of the village, and no one wanted to miss the big day. Rumors flew about the mysterious founder who had built the place from nothing and brought pride back to Tindoro. But no one knew the full truth yet. Zalima and Tindoro were busy cleaning the back hall, unaware of what was about to unfold. They had worked hard, hoping to keep their heads down and survive on whatever little dignity they had left. They were not invited to the ceremony, of course. They were just cleaners now. But fate had other plans. As the ceremony began, the crowd cheered when Madame Jemba, now a board member of the academy, stepped onto the stage to introduce the founder. "Today," she said with a proud smile, "we honor the journey of a girl who was once looked down on, mistreated, and thrown out, but she rose from the ashes like a phoenix. Let us welcome the woman behind Nyarai Designs, the founder of this academy." "Nyarai!" gasps filled the air. The music paused. People looked at each other in shock. From behind the stage curtain, Nyarai walked out in a golden dress of her own design. Her head was high, her smile calm, and her eyes sparkled quiet strength. The villagers stared, stunned. Was this the same Nyarai? The girl they once saw carrying water and cleaning clothes? The girl they ignored when Zalima shouted at her in public? Zalima, standing behind a pillar with a mop in her hand, froze. Her jaw dropped. Tindoro clutched her chest, whispering, "No, it can't be." Nyarai took the microphone. Her voice was gentle, but it held power. "Many years ago I lived in this village. I was a little girl who lost her mother and was forced to live like a servant in her own home. My father remarried, and from that day my life was full of pain. I was beaten, starved, insulted, and finally thrown out like garbage." Whispers filled the crowd. Eyes turned towards Zalima and Tindoro. "But I never gave up," Nyarai continued. "I worked hard. I believed in myself, and I forgave, but I never forgot." Now the crowd turned fully. Some people pointed at Zalima. Others shook their heads in disgust. "She treated her like trash," one woman hissed. "How can you hurt a child like that?" Another man shouted. Zalima stumbled forward, her face pale, tears in her eyes. She opened her mouth to speak, but the crowd had already decided. The shame was heavy, crushing. Nyarai didn't raise her voice. She didn't shout. She stood there in her grace, letting the truth shine louder than any words. The past had returned, but this time it had a new ending, one where the broken girl stood tall and the cruel ones bowed their heads in shame. The village was still buzzing from the truth that had been revealed. People couldn't stop talking about how the girl they had once ignored had turned into the most powerful woman they had ever seen. But Nyarai didn't let fame or praise change her heart. She remained calm, graceful, and kind, but she never forgot the pain she had endured. She didn't seek revenge. She didn't raise her hand or her voice against Zalima and Tanura. Instead, she let karma do its work quietly, in the most painful way, by showing them the life they could have had if they had just shown love. Zalima and Tanura were allowed to keep working at the academy, but every time they cleaned the floors, every time they saw Nyarai on billboards, in magazines, or giving interviews to famous networks, the shame inside them grew heavier. Nyarai paid them fairly, treated them with respect, and never humiliated them in public. But that silence, that kindness, made it hurt even more. They knew they didn't deserve it. They knew the girl they once called useless was now the one feeding them. One evening, Nyarai stood by the window of her office, looking out at the sunset. Her eyes weren't filled with anger. They were filled with strength. She whispered to herself, "I forgive you, Zalima, but I will never forget." Those words were her power. She didn't need to scream. She didn't need to punish them. Their guilt was punishment enough. Instead of drowning in her past, Nyarai used her story to light the way for others. She opened more fashion schools across the region, especially for girls who were abandoned or abused. She gave them shelter, skills, and hope. She visited villages and shared her journey, telling young girls that no one could decide their worth except themselves. Her pain became her purpose. Her scars became her strength. Soon, international designers invited her to Paris, Milan, and New York. Her brand, Nyarai Designs, became a symbol of resilience and beauty. But even when she stood on global stages, she always spoke about Tindoro, about the girl who once cried in the dark, sewing with a broken needle and dreaming of light. The world saw a queen, but Nyarai never forgot the little girl inside her. She knew that true power wasn't about gold or fame. It was about rising without stepping on others. She had every reason to be bitter, but she chose to be better. And while Zalima and Tanura lived in the very shadow of her success, Nyarai walked forward, head high, spirit unshaken, because sometimes the sweetest revenge is simply living well. And that, more than anything, is how karma served its cold dish, with silence, dignity, and unstoppable grace. If this story touched your heart, if you've ever been made to feel small, worthless, or invisible, remember Nyarai. Remember that no pain lasts forever, and no darkness can stop the light within you from shining. Nyarai was once just a broken girl, with nothing but hope in her heart and a needle in her hand. Today, she stands as a symbol of strength, grace, and unstoppable courage. Let this be your reminder. No matter how they treat you, your worth is not defined by their cruelty. One day, the very people who laughed at your tears may live in the shadow of your success. Keep going, keep believing, because your story isn't over yet. If this powerful tale moved you, please like this video, share it with someone who needs hope today, and subscribe to our channel for more inspiring African stories that warm the heart and open the eyes. Your support helps us tell more stories like Nyarai's, stories of strength, of truth, and of justice. Thank you for watching. Keep believing in yourself, and never ever forget, the most beautiful revenge is living a life filled with purpose.